TIFU by becoming my boss's emotional support therapist by accident. This happened over the last few months, but the real fallout hit me this week. For context, I, 28 work as a data analyst at a mid-sized marketing firm. Think spreadsheets, pie charts, and meetings where everyone pretends to care. I'm generally the quiet guy in the office, friendly but introverted. I keep my head down, get my work done, and try to avoid drama. Enter Greg. Greg is my boss. Greg is also going through a divorce. How do I know this? Because I have unwillingly become Greg's emotional support human. I never asked for this role. I never applied. I was recruited through an act of pure misunderstanding that spiraled into an HR-level situation. It all began on a Monday about 3 months ago. I was microwaving leftover tikka masala in the break room, trying to scroll Reddit in peace, when Greg walked in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. Puffy eyes, tie askew, one shoe partially untied. I made the fateful mistake, of saying, "Rough morning?" That's all it took. Greg let out a sigh that came from the depths of his soul and said, "It's been a rough year, man." Now, this is where a socially aware person would nod and walk away. But not me. No, my anxious brain thought, let's be empathetic. So I said, "Want to talk about it?" That's when he sat down. Right there. On the break room couch, which no one really uses because it smells faintly of tuna and despair. He launched into a monologue about how his wife, ex-wife now, had left him for her spin instructor named Kyle. How he missed his dog. How the house was too quiet. How he didn't know who he was outside of his marriage. At this point, I was halfway through my tikka masala, silently screaming inside. But I didn't want to be rude, so I just kept nodding and saying things like, "That sounds really tough and I'm sorry you're going through that." That was mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 was not setting boundaries. Because after that first conversation, Greg apparently decided I was his guy. His confidant. His work therapist. His emotional support intern. Over the following weeks, it escalated. He started booking meetings with me that weren't on the calendar. One-on-one syncs where no syncing happened, just Greg venting while I blinked in Morse code at the Zoom camera. He'd send me Slack messages like, "You up for a quick chat? Just need to clear my head." He cornered me in the stairwell once. A full-blown heart-to-heart, 5 minutes before a meeting with the VP of Finance. I had to walk in late, sweating, with the emotional weight of someone else's marriage collapse hanging on me like a wet coat. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't I say anything? Great question. Here's the thing, I didn't want to seem unempathetic. Greg was clearly going through it. Plus, he's my boss. I figured it was a weird phase and it would pass. Spoiler, it did not pass. Cut to 2 weeks ago. Our company held a quarterly team-building retreat at this rustic leadership camp in upstate New York. Picture fire pits, trust falls, and motivational slogans like "Pain is just growth in disguise." On the second night, there's a group dinner. Everyone's drinking wine and trying to bond over bad catering. Greg is a few glasses deep and sits next to me. He starts getting emotional again, talking about how he wouldn't have gotten through the last few months without a certain someone. At this point, I'm thinking, please don't say my name. He says my name. Loudly. Everyone looks at me. He raises his glass and says, "To Jake. Honestly, you've been my rock, man." People start clapping. I wish I were exaggerating. Someone joked, "Jake's basically HR now." And someone else said, "Give the man a raise," and Greg laughed and said, "Don't tempt me." It was all in good fun until Greg added, "No, but seriously, I don't think I'd still be here if it weren't for Jake." Cue, dead silence. Now I'm looking around like I've just accidentally proposed at someone else's wedding. My director is giving me side eye. One of the interns mouthed, "WTF," at me. I try to laugh it off and say something like, "Haha, just doing my part," but the damage was done. This week, I was pulled into an actual HR meeting. Apparently, someone filed an anonymous concern about boundary issues between me and Greg. I had to explain everything, how it started in the break room, how I never meant to become the office therapist, how I literally just wanted to eat my tikka masala. HR was surprisingly sympathetic. They said they'd have a talk with Greg about appropriate workplace communication. That part is still pending. I, meanwhile, have been reassigned to a different team for now. I think it's supposed to be temporary, but I also think they're trying to extract me from whatever emotional entanglement they think I'm in. The cherry on top? Greg sent me a handwritten thank you card. A literal card. It said, "I know I've leaned on you a lot lately. You're a good man." I'll never forget that. Taped to the card was a $25 Starbucks gift card. I haven't used it. I'm scared it'll trigger another emotional dump if he sees me drinking a vanilla cold brew. So yeah. TIFU by trying to be nice to my boss and accidentally becoming his emotional crutch. If anyone needs me, I'll be hiding behind a spreadsheet, rethinking every social interaction I've ever had. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by faking food poisoning to skip a wedding and accidentally getting committed to a psychiatric facility for 72 hours. This happened about a year ago, and I still get a cold sweat thinking about it. I've never told anyone the full story, not even my therapist. But after lurking on this subreddit for years, I figured I owe the world a cautionary tale. So, I, 27M, was invited to a wedding. Not just any wedding, my ex-girlfriend's. We dated for 4 years, broke up mutually, or so I thought, and she rebounded fast. Within 6 months, she was engaged to some financial analyst named Troy who looks like he was 3D printed from a catalog called Husbands of Instagram. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I tried to be mature. She invited me to the wedding, which I took as a weird power move. Like, who does that? But I RSVP'd yes because I figured it would make me look like I was over it. Fast forward to the week of the wedding. I start having spirals. Nightmares. Daymars. I kept imagining giving an awkward hug to her mom, who once drunkenly told me I was the only man who could put up with her daughter's crazy. I pictured the moment during the ceremony when the officiant asked if anyone had objections. My inner goblin whispered, "You do." I couldn't do it. I chickened out. But instead of just declining politely like a normal adult, I decided to fake food poisoning. I texted her the night before, "Hey, I'm so sorry, I ate some bad oysters and I've been vomiting nonstop. I'm gonna miss the wedding." She sent back a short "feel better soon," which stung more than I'd like to admit. To sell the lie, I called in sick to work too. I figured I'd stay inside all day, binge The Office, and order some pad thai. I posted nothing on social media. Radio silence. I thought I'd gotten away with it. Here's where the universe decided to play hacky sack with my dignity. Around 11 a.m., I got a knock on my apartment door. I assumed it was my Uber Eats. Instead, it was my downstairs neighbor, Ms. Parker. Sweet older lady, very nosy, always wears a bathrobe even in July. She said she hadn't seen me leave my apartment in 2 days and was worried I'd collapsed. I told her I was sick but fine, and she shuffled away. I thought that was the end of it. Nope. Apparently, Ms. Parker called my mom. How she got my mom's number, I'll never know. Maybe I gave it to her once in passing. Anyway, my mom tried calling me. I didn't answer because I was mid-binge of season 6 and didn't want to pause for a guilt trip. So she freaked out. Called a wellness check on me. 2 hours later, 3 very serious-looking cops were at my door. I answered in my pajamas, holding a half-eaten spring roll, and they asked if I was okay. I said, yeah, just sick. One of them asked if I'd taken anything. I said, just some Dayquil. Another cop looked at the coffee table, where unfortunately I had a pile of Tylenol PMs and some melatonin gummies scattered around like I'd just lost a game of pharmaceutical Jenga. This was a mistake. They started asking more questions. Was I feeling like hurting myself? No. Was I feeling like hurting anyone else? Also no. But I was so flustered that I couldn't stop nervously laughing. Like, wild-eyed, slightly unhinged laughter. I tried to explain that I was just sick and my neighbor was overreacting. That I'd lied about the wedding because I was embarrassed. This did not make things better. After a very awkward 15-minute standoff, I found myself involuntarily transported to the psych unit of the nearest hospital under a 5,150 hold. That's a 72-hour psychiatric observation for those of you who've never had the pleasure. Now let me paint you a picture. I'm in a gown with no shoelaces, trying to explain to a rotating door of mental health professionals that I'm not suicidal. I just really didn't want to see my ex get married. They didn't believe me. Not at first. Because who lies about food poisoning and accidentally gets themselves institutionalized? Apparently, me. The first day was the worst. I was in a room with a guy named Carl who kept reciting the plot of The Matrix and offering me protection beads he'd made out of cornflakes. The nurses thought I was just withdrawn, maybe depressed. I tried to act upbeat but not too upbeat, or they'd think I was manic. On the second day, a psychiatrist finally took me seriously after I laid out the full story, including the text message I sent to my ex and a time-stamped food delivery receipt that clearly showed I'd ordered Thai food, not suffered from seafood-related trauma. Even then, I had to wait the full 72 hours before I could be released, just to be safe. They gave me pamphlets about stress management and emotional honesty. When I got out, my phone had blown up. My mom was furious. My boss had called twice. And the icing on the cake? My ex texted me, "Hey, I heard you weren't doing well. Hope you get the help you need." I wanted to disappear. To make matters worse, my neighbor Ms. Parker now treats me like I'm a fragile war veteran. Every time she sees me, she gives me this look like she's wondering whether I'm going to snap and start chewing on mailboxes. She brings me soup. She waters my plants without asking. It's sweet, but it's also constant and a little haunting. Work was weird for a while. People assumed I'd had a breakdown and didn't ask questions, which I was both grateful for and disturbed by. I started seeing an actual therapist, who nearly choked laughing when I told him what happened. He said he's seen patients fake a lot of things, but never commit to the bit so hard they end up in a psych ward. So yeah. That's how I faked food poisoning and accidentally got myself institutionalized. Moral of the story? Just be honest. Or at the very least, don't ignore wellness checks. And maybe, just maybe, skip the pad thai next time. TIFU by accidentally catfishing my therapist for 6 months, so this happened over the last half a year and came to a catastrophic head last week. For context, I'm a 32-year-old guy who's been dealing with pretty intense social anxiety and depression, especially after a bad breakup about a year ago. My therapist suggested journaling or trying anonymous online support forums to vent or connect without the pressure of face-to-face interaction. Cool. I can do that. Around the same time, I joined this small mental health support Discord server. It was cozy, maybe 60 to 70 active members, and everyone used pseudonyms and avatars, so I figured I'd just lurk and maybe chime in occasionally. I created an account using the name Jess, a name I've always liked for some reason, and used a stock photo of a woman with a golden retriever as the profile picture. I figured if I was totally anonymous and people assumed I was a woman, I'd be less likely to get random DMs or weird attention. That part worked. What I didn't expect was to make actual friends. Over a couple of weeks, Jess became kind of popular in the group. I was good at writing supportive messages and helping others talk through their problems, probably because I was channeling stuff I'd been told in therapy myself. One user in particular, Northridge Psych, always seemed to be online when I was, and we started chatting more and more, moving to DMs after a while. Our conversations were mostly mental health related at first, but they slowly drifted into more personal stuff, music, books, weird dreams. It felt safe. I was more honest and vulnerable through that alias than I'd ever been in my real life. We even joked about how Jess would be a great therapist someday. Here's the kicker. After 6 months of this anonymous, heartfelt back and forth with this person, who I began to think of as a sort of emotional anchor, I show up to my weekly therapy appointment and my therapist says, "I've had a strange week, and something came up that I need to bring to your attention. I want you to keep an open mind." Okay. She pulls out her phone, opens Discord, and shows me a chat. I swear the universe paused for a second. It was my messages. My exact words, from a few nights ago. Under the name Jess. With the golden retriever avatar. My stomach did this freefall thing like I was in an elevator and someone cut the cable. My brain started scrambling to rationalize it. Maybe someone copied my messages and sent them to her? But then I saw her username. Northridge Psych. My therapist. I had been unknowingly DMing my therapist for 6 months. My therapist is a relatively young woman in her late 30s. I knew she was involved in online mental health advocacy, but she never mentioned Discord specifically. Apparently, she joined that server under an alt account just to keep tabs on general trends in mental health conversations, maybe offer subtle advice. She never expected to actually connect with anyone in a meaningful way, until Jess came along. She told me she figured it out when I vented in one session about a specific situation, one that Jess had messaged her about in eerily similar terms a few days earlier. She got suspicious, and then the timestamps and language matched too closely to ignore. So there we were, sitting across from each other in this small, beige office while the realization hung in the air like a gas leak. We spent the rest of the session in silence, except for her saying, "This creates a serious ethical dilemma." No kidding. Long story short, she referred me to a different therapist immediately. Said she couldn't continue our sessions due to a dual relationship and that it violated professional boundaries. I completely understand. Honestly, I would have done the same. But now I feel like I've lost 2 people at once, my therapist, who had been a stable presence in my life for nearly a year, and Northridge Psych, my anonymous online confidant who had become one of the few people I felt genuinely understood me. I logged into the Discord later that night, thinking I might explain or apologize. But Northridge Psych had deleted her account. Gone. Just vanished. And Jess? I deleted that account, too. It felt like the right thing to do, even though it left a weird, echoing silence in my chest. So yeah. I catfished my therapist, emotionally bonded with her anonymously, and blew up both of our lives without ever meaning to. Now I have to start over with a new therapist. I haven't worked up the courage to explain why I had to switch. Not sure I ever will. I might just say it was a personality mismatch or some vague excuse. But deep down, I'll always know I created a fake person who turned out to be more real than I expected. And then accidentally walked straight into a psychological minefield of my own making. TIFU by accidentally sending a breakup text to the wrong person, and now I have to explain myself to my best friend and his girlfriend. So, this all started a few days ago. I, 25M, have been in a long-term relationship with my girlfriend, 24F, who we'll call Sarah. Things were going pretty well, but as usual, like any couple, we were having some small problems, mostly about communication. We'd been arguing more often than usual, and there were times when I wasn't sure how I felt anymore. This led me to a bit of a crisis, where I felt I needed to talk things out with someone. Now, my best friend, Mark, 25M, is the kind of guy I go to when I need advice. We've known each other since high school, and he's always been a good sounding board for me. He's been in a solid relationship with his girlfriend, Emily, 24F, for about 2 years, and while they have their issues, they seem to work through things. So, I thought it would be a good idea to reach out to him for some advice on how to deal with this uncertainty I was feeling about Sarah. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, and started typing out this long text to Mark about my feelings. It was nothing too dramatic, just me venting a bit about the arguments Sarah and I had been having, and how I wasn't sure where we were headed. I poured my heart out, saying that I wasn't sure if we should keep going or take a break to figure things out. I knew that I was probably being a bit dramatic, but at that moment, I genuinely wasn't sure if I was ready to break up with Sarah. I just needed someone to listen and offer some perspective. I went to send the message, but as I was typing out a follow-up message to add more context, I made a fatal mistake. I accidentally sent it to Sarah instead of Mark. And, to make it worse, I didn't realize I had done this until I saw a text from Sarah pop up in my notifications. What the hell is this? I froze. My heart stopped. I quickly opened the text to see that Sarah had received my entire breakup message. The one where I expressed how unsure I was about our relationship and talked about taking a break or potentially breaking up entirely. Panic set in immediately. I knew I had to fix this, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how bad it looked. It was like I had just sent her a cold, impersonal breakup text. Before I could even formulate a response, Sarah started calling me. I debated whether or not I should answer, but I figured it was better to get ahead of this disaster. I picked up, trying to sound calm. Hey, Sarah. I didn't mean to send that to you, I stammered, but she cut me off. Then who were you trying to break up with? Mark? What is this, some kind of joke, she said, her voice filled with anger. Listen, I didn't mean it like that. I was talking to Mark about some stuff, and I accidentally sent it to you. It wasn't supposed to be for you. I didn't mean to, I started rambling, but she interrupted again. You're talking about breaking up with me to Mark, she snapped. You didn't even have the decency to talk to me first, but you're going behind my back and telling your best friend you're thinking about ending things? I could feel my face turning bright red. It's not like that. I didn't know what to do, and I needed advice. Wow, she said, her voice quiet but laced with hurt. I didn't think you'd be the kind of person to do something like this. Honestly, I don't know if I can even take you seriously right now. Before I could respond, she hung up. I sat there in shock. I had just sent a breakup text to my girlfriend by accident. I tried to breathe, but I couldn't. The weight of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had messed up in the worst possible way. But things didn't stop there. I needed to fix it. I immediately went to text Mark about what happened, so I could explain myself and get his help, but before I could even open my messages, I saw a text from him. Hey man, I'm about to head over to Emily's, but I'll talk to you later. Just wanted to check in. I was in full-blown panic mode now. I didn't even know where to start. I had no idea how to explain this mess to Sarah, and now I was worried about what Mark would think when I explained that I'd accidentally sent him a message meant for Sarah. I'd completely ruined everything. I decided to take a breather before reaching out to anyone again. I needed to calm down, think about my next steps carefully, and not make the situation worse. That night, I barely slept. I was filled with regret, frustration, and embarrassment. The next day, I sent Sarah a long message apologizing profusely for my mistake. I explained that it was an accident, that I didn't mean what I said in the text, and that I just needed some time to think about our relationship, not to break up with her. I asked if she would be willing to talk things through, and that I understood if she needed some space. She didn't reply for hours, which made me even more anxious. I was starting to fear the worst. But when she finally texted me back, it was clear that she was upset but willing to talk. We agreed to meet up at a coffee shop to talk things through. It wasn't easy. We had a long conversation about our relationship and the issues we had been facing. She explained how hurt she was by my actions, and I had to admit that I'd been avoiding addressing our problems for a while. It was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had. I apologized repeatedly, but I also had to face the fact that I had been emotionally distant, and that wasn't fair to her. After a lot of talking and some tears, we agreed to take some time apart to reflect on things. Not a breakup, but more of a let's figure out where we stand kind of deal. We're still in this pause phase, and I'm hoping we can figure things out. As for Mark, I had to explain the situation to him too. I told him about the accidental breakup text and how it all went down. He was, understandably, confused at first. But after I explained everything, he just laughed. "Dude, you've really outdone yourself this time," he said. "Honestly, I think we need to have a guy talk about your relationship troubles at some point." Emily, his girlfriend, also found the whole thing hilarious. She couldn't believe I'd accidentally sent a breakup text to Sarah and then had to apologize for it. They both found it absurd, but they were supportive and reminded me to communicate better in the future. So, yeah, that's how I ended up sending a breakup text to my girlfriend by accident and almost ruined my relationship over it. I've learned my lesson the hard way. If you're ever unsure about a relationship, don't go venting to your best friend about breaking up while texting your girlfriend at the same time. It'll come back to bite you. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with my cooking skills and almost burning down my house in the process, so I, 28M, thought it would be a great idea to host a dinner party for my friends this weekend. Now, I'm not exactly known for being a culinary genius. In fact, my cooking skills are, at best, basic, think microwave meals and toast. But, I figured, hey, how hard could it be? I'll just cook something simple, and everyone will love it. I had watched a few cooking videos on YouTube, so I felt pretty confident that I could pull it off. I invited a small group of friends over. There's Sarah, 29F, who's basically a food critic and the only person I know who can taste the difference between different brands of bottled water, Jake, 27M, who's a literal chef but never brags about it, so I figured he'd appreciate the effort, and Laura, 30F, who's basically the life of the party and will compliment anything you put in front of her, even if it's burnt to a crisp. I decided to make a fancy dish I had seen in one of those videos, a lemon garlic butter chicken with roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. It looked amazing in the video, and I was determined to make it just as good, if not better. I ran to the store to buy all the ingredients, even though my pantry was already stocked with enough food to survive the apocalypse. I spent the entire afternoon preparing. I got the chicken breasts marinating in a mixture of lemon, garlic, and butter, which already smelled pretty decent. The veggies were ready to go in the oven, and I was just finishing up the mashed potatoes when I realized I hadn't actually turned on the oven to preheat. So, in a moment of genius, I quickly turned it on and shoved the veggies inside anyway. No big deal, right? Well, that was my first mistake. I figured I had plenty of time, so I started setting the table and making sure the drinks were all set up. About 20 minutes later, I went into the kitchen to check on everything. The house smelled good, but something was off. The oven was too quiet. I checked, and it had barely reached 200 degrees Fahrenheit. For some reason, my oven was taking forever to heat up. In a panic, I cranked the temperature up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, thinking it would fix the issue. It did, sort of. Now, I've heard people say that you shouldn't put too much in an oven when it's still warming up, but I was on a mission. I didn't have time for the oven to reach the perfect temperature. I slammed the door shut, closed the oven, and went back to prepping the chicken. I was feeling pretty good about myself until I heard a faint hissing sound coming from the kitchen. I turned to see smoke starting to creep out of the oven. At first, I thought it was just steam from the veggies, but no, this was actual smoke. I rushed over, opened the oven, and was immediately greeted with a cloud of smoke so thick I could barely see inside. I pulled out the tray of vegetables and immediately realized my mistake. The veggies were charred black. I mean, they weren't just roasted. They were absolutely, 100% ruined. The carrots looked like they'd been through a fire, the zucchini was completely unrecognizable, and the potatoes, well, they were still in one piece, but they had the texture of cardboard. But I couldn't just throw them away. That would have been too embarrassing. I quickly shoved them aside and turned my attention to the chicken. When I opened the chicken pan, I was greeted by a horrifying sight. The chicken wasn't cooking properly, it was mostly raw in the middle, but the outside had already started to burn. My brilliant idea to multitask had backfired big time. I checked the mashed potatoes to see if they were at least salvageable. They weren't. I'd used way too much butter and not enough cream, so they were this weird, greasy, lumpy mess. In that moment, I realized the only thing I had managed to make successfully was the smoke detector go off. The beeping was so loud that I couldn't even hear myself think. My kitchen was starting to look like a war zone. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and started waving it around, hoping to put out the smoke, but that just made it worse. At this point, I panicked. My guests were about to arrive, and I was certain they would walk into a house that smelled like a burnt-down restaurant. I quickly opened all the windows, turned on the fans, and tried to clear the smoke, but it wasn't doing much. Jake arrived first, which was both a blessing and a curse. He walked in, took a deep breath, and said, smells like you're testing a new brand of charcoal?" I didn't have time to explain, so I just forced a smile and led him to the living room while I scrambled to salvage the situation. Sarah and Laura arrived shortly after, and I pretended like everything was fine. The house was still smoky, but I'd managed to move the ruined food out of sight. I set the table as if I hadn't just spent the last hour trying to prevent a kitchen disaster from turning into a full-fledged fire. Dinner time arrived, and I brought out the meal. I had hoped that, with some strategic plating, I could make everything look presentable. The chicken was so burnt that it was more of a charcoal sculpture than food, the veggies were practically inedible, and the mashed potatoes, let's just say they didn't have the texture of anything you'd want to put in your mouth. I watched their faces as they looked at the food. Jake, being the professional that he is, was the first to speak. Did you mean to cook it like this?" I laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. Sarah picked up her fork, poked the chicken, and it crumbled into a pile of ash. "This looks like a science experiment gone wrong," she said, half laughing, half wincing. Laura, bless her heart, took a bite of the mashed potatoes and tried to smile, but I could tell she was struggling to hide the grimace. "It's unique," she said, her voice betraying her. I could feel my face turning red. I decided that at this point, there was no saving the evening. I laughed awkwardly and told them the truth. "Okay, yeah, I've completely ruined dinner. This was supposed to be a nice meal, but instead, we're all going to have to order pizza." Jake, always the good sport, clapped me on the back. "Hey, it's okay. Cooking is a journey, man. You just skipped the learning part and went straight to disaster." We ended up ordering pizza, and the night was saved. We laughed it off, ate the pizza, and joked about my cooking skills for the rest of the evening. No one seemed mad, but I'm pretty sure they all now have a solid understanding of why I never cook. So, yeah, TIFU by thinking I could cook a fancy dinner for my friends. I'll stick to the microwave next time. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a simple home-cooked meal and almost burning my house down. So, here's the thing, I've been crushing on this girl for a while. Let's call her Sarah. We met through mutual friends a few months ago, and we've hung out a few times, mostly in group settings. Recently, I noticed that we'd been talking more, texting late into the night, and making plans to hang out more. I could tell she was warming up to me, so naturally, I thought it was time to take things to the next level. Now, I'm no chef, but I can make a decent meal. I've got a few things in my arsenal, like pasta, tacos, and some really good omelets. So, when I asked Sarah if she wanted to come over for a low-key dinner, she said yes. The problem? I wanted to cook something impressive. I didn't want to just do spaghetti or tacos, no, I wanted her to see me as someone who had their life together. Someone who could handle themselves in the kitchen and create an experience that would make her think, wow, this guy is something special. I started researching. I watched a few YouTube videos, browsed through some Pinterest boards, and even asked a friend who loves to cook for advice. After some deliberation, I decided on a nice, sophisticated dish, chicken marsala. It seemed simple enough but sounded fancy and definitely had that wow factor. I could already see myself plating it up with a glass of wine in hand, Sarah impressed by my culinary skills. The day of the dinner arrives, and I'm feeling good. I'm excited, confident, and ready to show off. I get all the ingredients: chicken breasts, mushrooms, marsala wine, butter, and heavy cream. I've got my apron on, I've got a bottle of red wine open for myself, and I'm ready to get started. The recipe I'm following looks straightforward, and I figure this is going to be a breeze. I start by browning the chicken, and things seem to be going well. I'm feeling like a pro, flipping the chicken in the pan like a seasoned chef. Sarah texts me saying she's on her way, and I feel this surge of excitement. I can't wait to see her reaction when she walks into my kitchen and smells the delicious aroma of the chicken cooking. Here's where I start to get cocky. The recipe says to cook the chicken for about 5 to 7 minutes on each side, but I'm thinking, this is too easy. I've got this. I let the chicken cook for a little longer than instructed because I'm trying to get that perfect golden brown color. And, hey, it's a little extra crispy, but no big deal. It's just chicken, right? I push on, adding the mushrooms and pouring in the marsala wine, getting all the juices to sizzle up. This is the point where the kitchen starts to fill with a mouth-watering aroma. My confidence is skyrocketing. Then I get to the sauce. This is where I really screw up. I misread the recipe in my excitement. It says to let the wine reduce by half, but in my haste, I decide to speed up the process. So, I turn up the heat. I'm staring at the pan, checking my phone for a text from Sarah, then checking the chicken, and then back at my phone. Everything is going great. Sarah is due to arrive in like 10 minutes. I can hear her pulling into my driveway. Perfect timing, I think to myself. But here's the thing, while I was distracted, the sauce was reducing far too quickly. The wine began to burn off too much too soon. That's when I realized I'd made a huge mistake. The smell in the kitchen changed from delicious to something off. I immediately panicked and tried to salvage the sauce by adding more wine and cream, but it was too late. The sauce was already beyond repair, it was burnt. I didn't want to give up, though. I'd already committed. So I pulled the chicken out of the pan and decided to just make some quick adjustments to the sauce. But as I was fiddling around with the pan, trying to salvage what was left of the disaster, I accidentally knocked over a bottle of olive oil that had been sitting on the counter. It spilled all over the stovetop. I quickly wiped it up with a towel, but of course, there was still a layer of oil on the burner. And, well, you can guess what happened next. I turned the burner back on to heat up the pan for the sauce and, like an idiot, I didn't realize there was still oil on the stove. A small flame flickered up from the burner, and suddenly, my kitchen was engulfed in a wave of smoke. I froze, staring at the flames licking the sides of the pan. My heart dropped into my stomach. This was not how I envisioned the night going. I grabbed the closest thing to me, a tea towel, and tried to smother the flames. It didn't work. If anything, it made things worse. The towel caught fire too. At this point, I'm not only panicking about burning down my house, but I also realize that Sarah is about to walk through that door and see the whole thing. In a panic, I grabbed the pan with the flaming oil and rushed to the sink to douse it with water. A huge mistake. As soon as the water hit the oil, the flames shot up, and for a moment, I thought my kitchen was going to turn into an inferno. I screamed in horror, fully convinced I was about to lose everything. By some miracle, the fire didn't spread, and I managed to get it under control by tossing a wet dish towel on the fire, smothering it enough to put it out. I stood there, breathing heavily, sweat pouring down my face, trying to process what had just happened. The kitchen was a disaster, smoke everywhere, the smell of burnt food and olive oil filling the air. I heard Sarah knock on the door, and I realized I still had no clue what to do. I opened the door and saw Sarah standing there with a huge smile on her face. She was holding a bottle of wine, clearly expecting to walk into a beautiful dinner, and instead, she was greeted with a smoke-filled kitchen, charred remnants of what was supposed to be a fancy meal, and me, looking like I had just survived a war zone. "Oh my God, what happened?" she said, her smile fading. I managed to laugh awkwardly, pointing to the charred mess on the stove. "Well, I tried to make you dinner. A special dinner. But I kind of, set the kitchen on fire. So, yeah. Dinner's not really happening." She stared at me, blinking for a moment, and then she burst out laughing. Not the judgmental laugh I was expecting, but a genuine, hysterical laugh. I stood there, covered in sweat, surrounded by smoke and ruined food, and she just laughed. "You're kidding me," she said between giggles. "Are you serious? I mean, I kind of did just almost burn my house down, so, yeah. I'm not sure I can call this dinner anymore." She shook her head, still laughing, but then her expression softened. "It's okay. I don't mind. Honestly, this is kind of hilarious." She stepped into the kitchen, wrapped me in a hug, and then said, "How about we just order pizza instead? And maybe avoid setting anything else on fire tonight?" I'm not sure what was worse, the disaster that was my dinner or the fact that I tried so hard to impress her, but in the end, she was more impressed with my ability to laugh at myself than my cooking skills. Long story short, we ordered pizza, had a great time, and laughed about the whole thing. But I'm pretty sure I'll never try to cook a fancy dinner for someone again. Or at least, not until I've mastered the art of not burning down my kitchen. So, this happened last week and I honestly can't stop cringing at myself. I was just trying to have a normal weekend, but in true TIFU fashion, everything went horribly wrong. I guess I should start at the beginning. I'm in my mid-20s and recently moved to a new city for work. I didn't really know anyone here, so I've been trying to get out and meet people. I figured I'd try my luck at a local bar where some of my coworkers mentioned they liked to hang out on weekends. It's a cool spot, kind of dive-y, with a relaxed vibe and a decent crowd. The night was going smoothly, I met a few people, had a couple of drinks, and was just enjoying the atmosphere. I was talking to this guy, Mike, who seemed like a solid guy. We were chatting about our jobs, hobbies, and of course, complaining about the weather. You know, typical small talk. Eventually, we got onto the subject of relationships, and that's where everything went downhill. Mike asked me if I was seeing anyone, and I told him no, not really. He asked if I was interested in meeting someone, and I said sure, it would be nice. He was asking all the right questions, and it was kind of flattering to be honest. At this point, I was starting to think maybe he was into me, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Then he asked if I had a type. I went on to describe my usual type, you know, tall, athletic, easygoing, into the same hobbies, that kind of thing. Mike, however, started giving me this weird look. I couldn't quite place it, but it was like a mix of confusion and disbelief. I brushed it off and kept talking, not thinking much of it. Fast forward about 15 minutes, and we're still having a good conversation when a girl named Sarah comes over to join us. She's cute, very bubbly, and immediately makes me feel at ease. She introduces herself, and we start talking about random stuff. She asks me what I do for work, and I tell her. She seems interested, but then she looks at Mike, then back at me with a raised eyebrow. Now, I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable because I can tell something's off. I'm trying to make small talk with Sarah, but she's not really paying attention to me. She's looking at Mike, then back at me, and I start feeling like I'm being judged or something. Finally, Mike interrupts, and that's when everything goes sideways. Mike goes, so, you don't remember, do you? I was confused. Remember what? He says, remember when you matched with me on Tinder, like, a few weeks ago? I froze. I had no idea what he was talking about. My face must have gone pale because I immediately started racking my brain. Tinder? I hadn't really been using it much lately, but I was pretty sure I hadn't matched with anyone recently. Wait, are you Mike from Tinder? I ask, trying to sound casual, but my stomach had already dropped. Mike nods and gives me this kind of awkward half-smile. Yeah, we talked a bit. You know, we sent a few messages. Suddenly, it all clicked, and I felt like a total idiot. I did match with him a few weeks ago. In fact, we exchanged a few messages, but I didn't respond after that. I guess I got distracted with other things and forgot about it. But here's the kicker, when we were chatting, I had completely misjudged him. At the time, I thought he was a bot or a scam account. He had some weird profile picture where he looked like he was posing with a bunch of puppies. It seemed too perfect, too staged. So, I just kind of ghosted him. It wasn't intentional, I just didn't have the mental bandwidth to deal with dating apps at that time. But now, here he was in front of me, the same guy I had ghosted, and I felt like a complete jerk. Mike, sensing my awkwardness, kept talking like it was no big deal, but I could tell it was awkward for him too. Meanwhile, Sarah had started giggling, and I could tell she was enjoying watching me squirm. At this point, I had two options, pretend nothing happened or come clean. So, of course, I chose the latter and told Mike that I totally recognized him now and that I'd been a jerk for ghosting him. I tried to explain that I just didn't realize it was actually him, and I honestly didn't mean to be rude. Mike just laughed it off, but I could tell he was a little taken aback. Here's where things went from awkward to disastrous. Mike, trying to keep it light, joked, well, at least you didn't swipe right on me and then ignore me, right? I chuckled nervously, but then I made the mistake of saying, yeah, you know, I only swipe right on people I'm really interested in, so I must have been really tired when I swiped on you. The moment those words left my mouth, I realized what I had just said. It sounded so bad. So cold. Like I was implying he wasn't interesting enough to keep my attention. Sarah's giggling stopped immediately, and Mike's face kind of fell for a second. I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. Mike tried to save the moment by brushing it off, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. Sarah, thankfully, stepped in and started asking him about his hobbies, but it was clear the vibe had shifted. I felt like a complete idiot. We didn't talk much after that, and the rest of the night was awkward. I tried to make small talk with Sarah and Mike, but it was clear I had made a mess of things. Eventually, I made some excuse about needing to go home, and I bolted out of the bar. On my way home, I couldn't stop replaying the entire conversation in my head. I mean, how could I have been so socially unaware? Ghosting someone is one thing, but then to make such a tone-deaf comment? I'm embarrassed just thinking about it. I guess I'm just lucky Mike and Sarah didn't completely call me out on it. The next day, I messaged Mike to apologize again, but he didn't respond. And honestly, I don't blame him. I wouldn't blame him if he never wanted to talk to me again. I probably wouldn't be interested in talking to me either if I were him. So yeah, TIFU by completely messing up a potential connection and making myself look like an absolute jerk in front of a group of people. And honestly, I might just take a break from dating apps for a while. So, I never thought I'd end up on Reddit telling this story, but here we are. Let me start by saying that I've learned a lot of things about myself today, mostly that I'm an idiot. It all began when I was invited to my best friend's wedding. You know, one of those weddings that you get excited about, but at the same time, it stresses you out a little because you're expected to be a certain way, especially when you're one of the groomsmen. It's one of those events where you can't really mess up because it's so important to the bride and groom. But, of course, I found a way to do just that. I should mention that I'm not great with public speaking. Some people get nervous about presenting in front of a class or talking to a group at work, but for me, the anxiety goes through the roof when I'm in a big social setting with everyone looking at me. The thought of messing up in front of an audience makes me want to crawl into a hole and hide. That's why when my best friend asked me to be one of his groomsmen, I was a little hesitant. But hey, it's your best friend's wedding. You can't exactly say no, right? So, I agreed, figuring the actual ceremony part would be easy enough to get through. The worst part was going to be the reception, where I'd probably have to give some kind of toast. But since I'm not one to back out of commitments, I started to mentally prepare myself for the big day. I practiced in front of a mirror, trying to craft the perfect speech that would be heartfelt, funny, and something that wouldn't embarrass me or my best friend. The day of the wedding arrived, and it was like something out of a movie. Everything looked perfect. The venue was beautiful, the weather was perfect, and everyone was in great spirits. It was one of those weddings where the bride looked like she walked out of a magazine, and the groom was beaming, looking like the happiest man on earth. I'm telling you, it was all going great. However, as I put on my tuxedo and headed to the venue, my nerves were getting the better of me. I couldn't stop sweating. I kept thinking, what if I screw up the toast? What if I trip while walking down the aisle? What if I say the wrong thing? All these thoughts kept running through my mind as I paced around in the dressing room. I was shaking. Then it was time. The ceremony was about to start, and I had to get into position. I was standing there at the front of the church, waiting for the bride to walk down the aisle. Everyone was looking sharp, and I was doing my best not to pass out from the nerves. The music started playing, and the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The bride made her grand entrance. It was perfect, everything went according to plan. The ceremony was beautiful. My best friend's vows were heartfelt, and the bride's were equally touching. It was one of those moments where you think, wow, this is real life. This is what true love looks like. The vows were exchanged, and they were pronounced husband and wife. Then, the real fun began. The reception started, and people were mingling, eating, and dancing. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders because the hard part, the ceremony, was over. But I had to get through the toast. The pressure was building. My best friend gave his speech, and it was great. He was cracking jokes, getting everyone to laugh, and everyone was loving it. Then, it was my turn. I stood up, heart pounding, and grabbed the microphone. Everyone turned their attention to me, and suddenly, I felt like I was standing in front of an entire stadium of people. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I took a deep breath, smiled, and began my speech. But instead of the heartfelt words I had practiced, what came out of my mouth was a complete mess. I was so nervous that I could barely form coherent sentences. I started talking about how happy I was for my best friend, how great of a guy he was, but then I tripped over my words. I started rambling about random memories from when we were kids, stuff that had nothing to do with the wedding. I was stumbling over my sentences, and the whole thing was just turning into a disaster. The worst part? I started to get emotional. I'm talking about ugly crying in front of everyone. I wasn't even talking about anything sad. It was like my brain couldn't control the floodgates anymore. I was on the verge of full-on sobbing while trying to make a toast. At one point, I literally had to pause and wipe my eyes, and all I could hear were the awkward coughs and shuffling of people in their seats. But the worst part, the real kicker, was when I said the wrong name. While I was trying to thank everyone for coming, I accidentally called the bride by the wrong name. I didn't just call her the wrong name, though, no. I called her the name of a girl I had briefly dated 2 years ago. In front of the entire wedding party, I said, and to my good friend Sarah, I just want to say, there was a long, painful pause. The room went deathly silent, and I felt like I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. My brain immediately recognized the mistake, and I froze. My face turned red, my palms started sweating again, and I just stood there, trapped in my own stupidity. I tried to salvage it by saying, I meant / bride's name. But it was too late. The damage was done. The bride and groom were both looking at me like I had just insulted them in front of everyone. My best friend's face was a mix of confusion and horror. I could hear people whispering, and I felt like I wanted to sink into the ground and disappear forever. I finished my toast as quickly as possible, stammering through my last few lines, and then I sat down, my heart pounding, my face still beet red. The rest of the night was a blur. People tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, but I could feel the awkwardness lingering in the air every time I walked past someone. I couldn't look anyone in the eye. My best friend came up to me later and asked if I was okay, but I could tell he was trying to hold back a laugh. It was that kind of awkward "are you mad, or are we cool" vibe. Honestly, I don't even know if he and the bride ever really forgave me for that one. But I'll tell you, I learned one important lesson that day. I'm never doing public speaking again. Ever. So yeah, that was my big TIFU moment at my best friend's wedding. If I'm lucky, this story will be forgotten by next week. If not, I'll have to live with the fact that I'll never be asked to give a toast at a wedding again. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I had always considered myself a fairly calm and collected person. I didn't lose my cool easily, and I generally prided myself on being the one people would turn to when they needed someone to talk to or vent their frustrations. So, when my wife, Kelly, suggested we take a trip to a quiet cabin in the woods for the weekend to get away from the chaos of everyday life, I was all in. We both had hectic schedules, and the idea of just disconnecting for a bit and enjoying nature seemed like the perfect solution. We picked out a cabin a couple of hours outside of the city, in a remote area that I was assured had little to no cell reception. I figured that was ideal, we could finally unplug and focus on each other. I made a couple of last-minute preparations, like grabbing a few snacks, packing our hiking boots, and bringing along my trusty Kindle for some light reading. Nothing could go wrong, right? We arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. It was a charming little place, nestled between tall pine trees and with a view of a serene lake. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Kelly and I were both excited, and I could see that she was already unwinding, her shoulders relaxing as we unpacked our things. We had the whole weekend ahead of us, and it felt like we were on the verge of a much-needed break from the usual stress of our lives. We spent the first evening enjoying a quiet dinner on the porch, sipping wine, and talking about everything and nothing. It was peaceful. The kind of peace you don't realize you need until you're in the middle of it. I remember feeling incredibly content as I looked out at the lake, the soft glow of the setting sun reflecting off the water. The next morning, we decided to go for a hike. Kelly had always loved the outdoors, and I was more of an occasionally enjoy a scenic walk kind of person, but I figured I could handle it. We packed a small bag with some water and snacks, then set off into the woods. The trail was fairly easy at first, with some mild inclines and plenty of beautiful scenery. I could tell Kelly was in her element, pointing out different types of trees and wildlife that I barely noticed. About halfway through our hike, though, things started to go south. We reached a clearing with a small stream running through it, and Kelly suggested we take a break by the water. I agreed, and we both sat down on some smooth rocks, dipping our feet into the cool stream. It was idyllic. That is, until I felt something brush against my leg. At first, I thought it was just a stray leaf or maybe some kind of plant. But then it happened again, and I realized there was something in the water. I quickly pulled my feet out and looked down, only to see a large, dark shape moving beneath the surface. I jumped back instinctively, heart racing. "What's wrong?" Kelly asked, looking up from her book. I think there's something in the water," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but failing miserably. I was already imagining the worst, some kind of snake or maybe a large fish. My mind was running wild, fueled by the worst possible scenarios. Kelly, however, looked intrigued. It's probably just a fish. Don't be such a baby. I watched as she casually dipped her hand into the water, trying to get a better look at whatever had freaked me out. That's when I saw it. The shape was moving again, and this time it was unmistakable. It wasn't just some harmless animal, it was an eel, a massive, slimy eel, slithering its way toward her hand. Kelly, don't touch it. I shouted, scrambling to pull her back. But it was too late. Kelly, ever the nature lover, didn't seem to realize the danger. She yanked her hand back, but not before the eel struck, its long, slippery body wrapping around her wrist. I froze. What the hell was happening? I had no idea that eels could be dangerous, but everything about the situation screamed bad idea. The eel was now coiled tightly around her wrist, and Kelly was yelping in a mixture of surprise and discomfort. I panicked. I tried to pull the eel off of her, but it wouldn't budge. It was surprisingly strong for something that looked so slimy. Kelly was starting to freak out, and I couldn't blame her. I felt completely useless. The panic that had been simmering in my chest exploded. I grabbed a nearby stick and began poking at the eel, hoping to get it to release its grip. Of course, this did absolutely nothing except annoy the creature, which then tried to coil itself tighter around her arm. At this point, I realized I needed help. I frantically looked around for any sign of other hikers or someone who could assist us. But, of course, we were miles away from civilization, and it was just the two of us in the middle of nowhere. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. I tried everything. I pulled, I poked, I even tried to splash water on the eel to make it go away, but nothing worked. Kelly was now on the verge of tears, and I was desperately trying to figure out how to get this damn eel off of her without doing more harm. And then, as if the universe was just waiting for my complete meltdown, I heard a voice. Need some help? I turned to see a middle-aged man walking along the trail, holding a fishing rod. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because I quickly shouted, yes, please. There's an eel, it's stuck on my wife's arm. The man, to his credit, remained calm. All right, no problem. I've dealt with these things before. He walked over and gently, but firmly, grabbed the eel by the head. With one swift motion, he managed to pull it off Kelly's arm and toss it back into the stream. Kelly and I were both left standing there, wide-eyed and speechless, as the man gave us a kind smile. Be careful next time. Eels don't like being messed with, he said, before walking away as casually as if he'd just helped us with a flat tire. I turned to Kelly, who was now staring at her wrist with a mix of confusion and relief. Are you okay? I asked, still trying to catch my breath. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm fine. Just, not exactly what I was expecting from a relaxing hike. Needless to say, we cut our hike short. The peaceful weekend in the woods had turned into an absolute disaster in a matter of minutes, and I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Kelly and I made our way back to the cabin, both of us shaken but grateful to be in one piece. We spent the rest of the weekend mostly indoors, sitting by the fire and trying to laugh off the whole incident. The cabin, once a serene getaway, had now become the backdrop to one of the most bizarre and stressful moments of my life. In hindsight, it's pretty funny, but at the time, I was just grateful the eel didn't cause any permanent damage. It was a lesson learned: never underestimate the power of a random creature in the wild. And next time, I'll make sure to leave the nature adventures to Kelly. So, I'm a 28-year-old guy who has always been pretty confident in my ability to handle situations. I pride myself on being the guy who can get out of awkward situations, diffuse tense moments, and basically stay calm in the middle of a storm. Or, at least, I thought I was. This all came crashing down during a particularly unfortunate date night that I'll never forget. I met a girl on a dating app. Her name was Lisa, and we hit it off right away. She was smart, funny, and absolutely gorgeous. We chatted for a week before finally deciding to go on a dinner date. We went to this cute little Italian restaurant in the city that had rave reviews online. It was cozy, intimate, the kind of place where you feel like you're on a date from a rom-com. Everything was perfect, except for the one thing I didn't realize was going to be a problem: my digestive system. Now, I'm no stranger to food. I love eating, and I'm the type of guy who's always down to try new things. But I also know that my stomach isn't exactly the most reliable organ. Sometimes, it decides to protest when I eat certain foods, but I thought I'd be safe on this date. I've been to Italian restaurants plenty of times before without any issues. Anyway, we were having a great time. The conversation flowed, the wine was delicious, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. I was feeling pretty good about myself, too. Lisa was laughing at my jokes, and I could tell she was into me. This is when it all started to go downhill. It began with a slight rumbling in my stomach. Not a big deal, right? I mean, sometimes your stomach gurgles. But this wasn't just a random gurgle. It was like a warning sign. And, of course, that's when the server came over to take our orders. I started to sweat a little, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling in my stomach. I ordered a simple pasta dish because, hey, I didn't want to go for something too heavy or rich. Lisa, on the other hand, ordered something with a lot of garlic and cheese, something that, in hindsight, I should have avoided entirely. We kept talking and laughing as the night went on, but I could feel the pressure building up. The rumblings turned into more of a bloated, crampy feeling. I knew something was coming, and I could feel the panic rising in me. At some point, I excused myself to the bathroom. Now, I've been in enough situations to know when my stomach is about to betray me. The second I walked into the bathroom, I realized this was going to be a lot worse than I thought. My body was preparing for a full-on assault, and there was no way I was going to make it through this date without some serious consequences. I took a deep breath, entered the stall, and prayed that I could get through this without making a scene. But, no. My body had other plans. The second I sat down, the floodgates opened. It was like a bomb going off in my intestines. There was no holding back at that point. The sounds, the smells, the whole situation was pure chaos. And as much as I wanted to just flush everything and pretend it never happened, I knew I had to be quick. The last thing I wanted was for Lisa to think I had somehow disappeared for an unreasonable amount of time. As I finished my business, I realized that not only was the situation bad, but I was now going to have to deal with the aftermath. I flushed the toilet and quickly grabbed some toilet paper, hoping to fix things as best as I could. The problem, however, was that the bathroom was small, and the smell was absolutely atrocious. It was like something had died in there. My immediate thought was, oh God, I can't go back out there. Lisa is going to smell it. She's going to know it was me. She's going to think I'm disgusting. I had no choice but to wait a few minutes and try to air out the bathroom. I cracked the door open slightly and fanned the air, but it wasn't helping. It was bad. But there was no way out of this. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to just face the music. I washed my hands, took a deep breath, and walked back out to the dining area. I thought I could maybe distract Lisa with my charm and humor, but the moment I sat back down, I could see it on her face. She was trying not to look at me too closely, but I could tell something was off. Her nose twitched slightly, and her eyes darted around as if trying to avoid inhaling any more of the atmosphere. I tried to continue the conversation, but it was hard. I could feel the tension building, and I was certain she was just waiting for an excuse to end the date. The worst part? She didn't even say anything directly, but I could tell she knew. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that the date was no longer going well. We finished our meal in awkward silence, and when the bill came, she immediately reached for her purse. It wasn't even a matter of splitting the check, she just wanted out. I tried to salvage the evening by suggesting we go for a walk afterward, but she quickly declined, saying she was tired and needed to head home. I watched her leave with a sinking feeling in my stomach, not because of what had happened earlier, but because I realized my stomach issues had probably ruined any chance of seeing her again. I was humiliated, defeated, and incredibly frustrated. How could something so simple, eating a meal, go so horribly wrong? After she left, I sat there for a few more minutes, replaying the entire evening in my head, trying to figure out where I went wrong. I knew it was the bathroom incident. I knew that the date had gone from fun and flirty to disaster status because of it. I spent the next hour trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation. I even debated texting her to apologize, but I knew there was no way to bring it up without it being painfully awkward. The worst part is, I haven't heard from Lisa since that night. I'm pretty sure she's never going to talk to me again, and that's completely fair. I don't blame her. But I will never, ever forget that night. I'll never forget the crushing embarrassment of knowing that a simple biological function completely derailed what could have been a promising date. It's a hard lesson to learn, but I guess I'll always be a little more careful about what I eat before any future dates. TIFU by accidentally sending a nude photo to my boss, and then trying to cover it up so, I have a job at a tech company. I'm a software engineer, and I spend most of my time in front of a computer. Now, anyone who's worked in tech knows that Slack is basically your lifeline. It's where all work communication happens, messages, updates, code reviews, memes, the occasional passive-aggressive thanks for the feedback. It's casual, but it's also business. And of course, everything gets archived. In short, it's the digital version of the office water cooler. A few months ago, I got a new boss. Let's call him Dave. Dave is the kind of boss who's super chill. He doesn't micromanage, he makes terrible dad jokes, and he once gave a presentation on the benefits of wearing Crocs to work. But despite being cool, he's also a bit old school when it comes to the corporate world. He's in his mid-40s, so he's not exactly in touch with all the new technology and gadgets younger people are using. This becomes important later. Anyway, one evening I was at home, trying to unwind after a long week. I had been texting a girl I was seeing, let's call her Sarah. We had been dating for a few months, and the relationship was starting to heat up, if you know what I mean. We were getting a little more comfortable with each other, and one thing led to another, and I ended up sending her a pretty explicit photo of myself. Not gonna lie, I thought it was a pretty damn good photo. I didn't think much of it. We'd been joking about sending each other these kinds of photos, so I figured it was a normal part of modern-day relationships. But, as fate would have it, I made a huge mistake. While I was still sitting in my living room, I grabbed my phone to send Sarah a few follow-up texts. I had taken a screenshot of something work-related earlier, and in my lazy attempt to multitask, I reached for the screenshot folder instead of my text thread with Sarah. My fingers weren't fully cooperating, and before I even realized what happened, I had sent the photo to the wrong person. Instead of sending it to Sarah, I accidentally sent the nude photo to Dave, my boss. Now, to be clear, I didn't realize it was Dave until I heard the ding sound on my laptop from the Slack notification. I was immediately hit with that familiar, sinking feeling in my stomach that only comes from a mistake of catastrophic proportions. I stared at my screen in disbelief. There, in all its glory, was the photo I had intended for Sarah, now sitting in the Slack chat with my boss. I instantly panicked. The photo wasn't blurry or poorly lit. It was crisp and very clear, too clear. I tried to immediately delete it, but Slack doesn't let you unsend a message once it's been sent, and I was pretty sure that Dave had seen it by now. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I just stared at the screen, wondering if my career was over. This was the kind of thing that would haunt you for years. I was screwed. I quickly typed a message, hoping to salvage the situation. I didn't know what else to do, so I went with the only thing that seemed somewhat plausible. I typed, "Oh my God, sorry, that was meant for someone else." That's right. I tried to explain that I had sent an explicit photo to my boss by claiming it was meant for someone else. Not exactly a clever cover-up, but it was all I had. I then followed up with, "Please disregard that." I was trying to send it to a friend. I waited with bated breath for Dave's response. The silence was unbearable. After what felt like an eternity, Dave finally responded. What the hell? I don't know what this is, but if you need to take a personal day tomorrow, just let me know. I couldn't believe it. My boss, who had just seen me naked, was offering me time off to deal with the situation. But instead of doing what any normal person would do, apologize profusely and crawl into a hole to die, I decided to go with the most absurd route possible. I panicked, and in my panic, I typed back, "Thank you so much, Dave. I'll be fine, I'm just dealing with some personal issues." And then, of course, I added, "If you could just delete that message, that would be amazing." Dave didn't respond to the request to delete it, which probably meant he wasn't going to do that. Instead, he just replied, "I'll leave it to you to handle, but if you ever want to talk, let me know." At this point, I was mortified. But I told myself that it could have been worse. Dave was being pretty cool about it. Maybe he didn't care? Maybe he was just so taken aback by the photo that he didn't know how to respond. Either way, it was clear that I had to address it further, and I needed a way to make things right. The next morning, I showed up to work, trying to act like nothing happened. When I saw Dave in the hallway, I tried to avoid eye contact, but of course, he was the one who broke the awkward silence first. "Hey, how's everything going? You okay?" Dave asked, a little too casually. "I'm good, yeah. Just dealing with some things." "Thanks for, being understanding," I mumbled, feeling the heat rise in my face. My hands were clammy, and I couldn't stop fidgeting. "Listen, no problem. I get it. Everyone has personal stuff. Just, maybe keep the photos to a minimum next time? If you need to talk about anything, I'm happy to chat," Dave said, and then, as if to ease the tension, added, "I'm glad you're not a catfish though." I couldn't help but laugh awkwardly, which only made the situation worse. It felt like my entire body was on fire. I quickly excused myself and hurried to my desk, wondering how in the world I was going to make it through the rest of the day without my coworkers finding out what had happened. Later that week, Dave sent out a Slack message to the entire team, joking about how we should all be careful with our messages and not send anything to the wrong people. It was his way of easing the situation, but it felt like the universe was poking fun at me. That was months ago, and somehow, I still work for the guy. In fact, I'd even argue that Dave's been cooler with me since then, which I guess is a weird silver lining. But yeah, it was definitely a huge screw-up, and I'm still cringing just thinking about it. So, if you ever get the urge to send an explicit photo to someone, just double-check the recipient first. Because the last thing you want is to accidentally send it to your boss. And I guess the moral of the story is, don't send nudes to your boss, no matter how chill they seem. If they're a good boss, they'll give you a pass. But the shame? The shame never goes away. TIFU. By trying to impress my friends with a DIY project and almost burning down my house, I'm no stranger to trying to impress my friends, but this time, I definitely went a little too far. Let me set the scene for you. It was a Saturday evening, and I was hosting a small get-together at my place. A few of my closest friends, a couple of beers, and some snacks, nothing too crazy. However, the atmosphere was just right for a little bit of "let's try something new" energy. You see, I've always been the handyman in our group. Whether it's building shelves, fixing a broken chair, or assembling IKEA furniture without needing the instructions, I like to think of myself as the guy who can get things done. That night, I had the brilliant idea to show off my latest project, a homemade fire pit. I had been researching how to make a fire pit out of concrete blocks, and after watching a couple of YouTube videos, I felt like I was ready to take it on. The plan was simple: take a few concrete blocks, arrange them in a circle, add some gravel and sand at the bottom, and voila, a DIY fire pit. How hard could it be? I had all the tools, the materials, and most importantly, the confidence to pull it off. Now, I want to clarify one thing. I wasn't trying to make a campfire-sized bonfire in my backyard. I just wanted a small, controlled flame to keep the vibe cozy and warm. It was a simple setup, and I thought it would add to the night's aesthetic. So, I gathered all the necessary materials and started setting up in the corner of my backyard, thinking this would be a fun surprise for my friends. I called a few of them over to help me arrange the blocks, and within 20 minutes, we had a nice little circle of concrete ready to go. We filled the base with gravel and sand as per the instructions I'd watched, and then came the fun part, the fire. I had a small propane torch that I had borrowed from my neighbor. He's a contractor, so I figured he knew his stuff. I thought that if I used the torch to light a small pile of kindling and paper in the center, I'd have a perfectly controlled fire. But for some reason, when I hit the ignition button, the flame came out a little stronger than I expected. And before I could even register what had happened, the small pile of paper and kindling exploded in a burst of flames that shot up several feet in the air. It was like something out of a movie. The fire spread rapidly, licking at the edges of the concrete blocks, and I froze in complete panic. The thing about fire is that it's unpredictable. When you're standing there, watching a seemingly innocent flame turn into something that feels much more dangerous, it's terrifying. I tried to tell myself that it was still small enough that I could control it, but I could feel the heat radiating in waves, and the flames were starting to lick the wooden fence that separated my yard from the neighbors. I called out to my friends, who were all just as stunned as I was. "Hey! Help me!" I yelled, but no one moved. They were all still standing there, eyes wide, too shocked to process what was happening. By this point, I was desperately trying to figure out what to do. I ran inside to grab the hose, but as I turned the corner of the house, I was hit by a wave of heat. I could feel the fire spreading and quickly realized I might not be fast enough. In my panic, I made a rookie mistake. I ran to the garage to grab the fire extinguisher. Why didn't I just use the hose in the first place? Because I thought the fire extinguisher would be more efficient. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. As I fumbled around, looking for it in the cluttered shelves, I heard one of my friends shout from the backyard, "It's starting to burn the fence." My heart dropped. I finally found the fire extinguisher, but by the time I ran back outside, the fire had spread beyond the fire pit. The fence was definitely starting to catch fire, and there was no sign of it slowing down. In sheer panic, I sprayed the fire extinguisher at the base of the flames, but it barely did anything. The fire just seemed to laugh in the face of my attempts to stop it. At this point, I realized I had to do something drastic. I told my friends to grab the garden hose and try to help, but they were still in shock, staring at the fire as it continued to grow. I managed to get the hose attached to the spigot, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely turn the knob. Finally, I managed to get the hose going, and the water started spraying out, but not nearly enough to put out the fire. The flames had grown so large that the water was practically useless. It felt like I was trying to use a glass of water to put out a volcano. That's when my neighbor, the contractor, showed up. I don't know how he knew what was happening, but there he was, jogging over with a serious look on his face. "What the hell did you do?" he asked, as he immediately began helping me with the fire extinguisher. With his help, we managed to get the fire down to a manageable size, and after what felt like an eternity, the flames finally died down. The fence was scorched, but miraculously, nothing else caught fire. My backyard looked like a war zone, with charred patches on the ground, a destroyed fence, and a pile of still smoking concrete blocks where the fire pit used to be. At this point, I was both humiliated and relieved. My friends had finally snapped out of their shock and were trying to help clean up, but no one said much. What do you even say after something like that? "Hey, sorry I almost burned down your house?" They were definitely not impressed by my DIY fire pit anymore. I spent the next few hours apologizing to everyone. My neighbor was nice enough to come over and help me put out the last of the embers and patch up the hole in the fence, but I could tell that the whole evening had been ruined. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but feel like I'd learned a very expensive lesson in overconfidence. The fire pit, which was supposed to be a fun little project, ended up being a disaster that I'll never live down. The moral of the story: if you're going to try to impress your friends with something DIY, maybe stick to the easier projects, like building a bookshelf. Don't try to make a fire pit unless you really know what you're doing. TLDR: tried to build a DIY fire pit to impress my friends, but accidentally set my fence on fire and almost burned down my house. TIFU by thinking I could handle my dad's old power tools and almost losing a finger. I have always been the I can do it myself type of person. It doesn't matter if I'm changing a tire, fixing a leaky faucet, or assembling furniture from IKEA, I just prefer to figure things out on my own. My dad, on the other hand, is the kind of guy who would rather fix something than hire someone. He has a garage full of tools, some of which are older than I am. I've always thought of myself as pretty handy, but I'd never really delved into using his more intimidating power tools, like the table saw or the circular saw. They looked powerful and, frankly, a little scary, but I figured it would be fine as long as I read the manual. Famous last words, right? This all started when I decided I wanted to make some custom shelves for my living room. I was tired of the generic ones that I bought from a store, and I wanted to do something unique, something that looked like I put actual effort into it. I had a rough idea of the design, but I needed to cut some thick pieces of wood to get the shelves to fit perfectly in the space I had. I figured, why not just use one of my dad's tools? They were sitting unused in his garage, and he was away on a business trip, so I wouldn't be bothering him. I decided to use the table saw because, well, it seemed like the easiest option. How hard could it be, right? I've seen him use it 1,000 times. I'm no expert, but I'm not an idiot either. I'd be fine as long as I followed the safety instructions. I grabbed a 2x4 piece of wood, measured out the cuts, and set up the saw. It was a beautiful old machine, a little rusty around the edges, but it looked solid. Before I got started, I made sure to put on the safety glasses, gloves, and even some ear protection because, hey, I'm not stupid. But looking back, I now realize that there was a lot more I should have done before starting. I didn't check the blade height, or the alignment, or the angle. I didn't even make sure the saw was properly secured to the workbench. It was one of those situations where you're so eager to get started that you don't bother checking all the little details. Classic mistake. I turned on the saw, and immediately the noise hit me. It was deafening. The power of the machine made the whole garage feel like it was vibrating. My heart started beating a little faster, but I reassured myself that it was fine. I was going to make a few cuts, and then I could sit back and admire my handiwork. I fed the wood through the saw, guiding it along the fence, and everything seemed fine at first. The wood cut smoothly, and I thought to myself, this isn't so bad. I've got this. That was until I got about halfway through the cut. Somehow, the wood shifted just slightly, and the saw caught it in a way that I hadn't anticipated. The next thing I knew, the board jerked forward with a speed I wasn't ready for. My right hand, which had been holding the wood in place, was suddenly too close to the blade. It was a split second of panic. My mind screamed, but everything moved so slowly as I watched my hand move toward the whirring blade. I didn't even think to pull it away in time. My index finger brushed against the edge of the spinning saw, and I felt the sharpest pain I've ever experienced in my life. I screamed out in shock and fear, instantly yanking my hand away from the saw. The wood fell to the ground with a loud thud, and I was left standing there, staring at my finger, which was now bleeding profusely. In that moment, I froze. The pain hit me like a ton of bricks, but it was also mixed with the realization of what I had just done. My first thought wasn't even about the injury. It was more about how incredibly stupid I had been. The bleeding wasn't stopping, and I knew that I needed to do something fast. I stumbled into the house, leaving a trail of blood on the floor as I rushed to the bathroom. I tried to hold my finger under cold water, but it wasn't doing much to slow the bleeding. I grabbed a towel and pressed it against the wound, but that only seemed to make things worse. I couldn't even tell how bad it was, everything was blurry from the pain and the blood. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was watching myself from a distance. I tried to call my dad, but he was on a conference call and I knew he wouldn't be able to pick up. So, I called my mom instead, who immediately screamed and told me to get to the ER. I'll be honest, I was so panicked and dizzy that I almost couldn't drive myself there, but somehow I managed. By the time I arrived, my finger was swollen and the blood had started to clot, but I still couldn't tell how bad the damage was. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I was finally seen by a doctor, who took one look at my finger and didn't mince words. This could be bad. It might require stitches, or worse, you might need surgery, he said. I nearly passed out at the thought of losing part of my finger, but the doctor assured me that it was unlikely, given that the cut wasn't deep enough to sever anything major. They cleaned it up, put some stitches in, and gave me a few painkillers. The whole time, I kept thinking about how close I had come to really hurting myself. It turns out I got lucky. My finger was still intact, although it was going to take a few weeks to fully heal. I spent the next few days feeling like an idiot, replaying the incident in my mind over and over. If I had just taken a moment to really think about what I was doing, if I had checked the saw properly, I wouldn't have been in that situation. My dad came home a few days later, and I tried to explain what happened, but he wasn't mad, he was relieved that I hadn't lost a finger. He also took the opportunity to give me a long lecture about safety, which I definitely deserved. Now, every time I see a power tool, I can't help but remember that feeling of panic when I realized my finger was too close to the blade. I've learned a lot about the importance of taking my time, reading the instructions, and checking everything multiple times before diving into something like that. I won't make the same mistake again, but man, I'll never look at a table saw the same way again. TLDR, tried using my dad's old power tools to make some shelves. Got careless, almost lost a finger when the saw jerked unexpectedly. Ended up at the ER with stitches and learned the importance of checking everything before using dangerous tools. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with my cooking skills, and it backfired in the worst way possible. A little backstory, I, 25M, have been friends with this girl Emma, 24F, for about a year now. We met through mutual friends at a party and hit it off immediately. Over the months, we'd hang out pretty regularly, grabbing drinks, watching movies, and just chatting about life. I've always had a bit of a crush on her, but I wasn't sure if she felt the same way. We never really talked about relationships, and I didn't want to risk ruining the friendship, so I kept my feelings to myself. Now, a few weeks ago, she invited me over to her place to hang out, and as we were chatting, she mentioned that she had been trying to cook more at home. She was looking for new recipes to try but admitted that she wasn't the best cook. I, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. I've always loved cooking and considered myself pretty decent in the kitchen. I saw this as an opportunity to not only impress her but maybe even flirt a little bit. So, naturally, I offered to cook for her next time we hung out. She seemed excited about the idea, and we set a date for me to come over. I spent the next few days planning the perfect meal. I wanted it to be something impressive but also not too complicated. After some thought, I decided on making a homemade risotto with roasted chicken and a side of garlic bread. I'd made risotto a few times before, so I knew the recipe well, and I figured it would show off my skills without being over the top. Plus, I thought it would be the kind of dish that would give me the opportunity to get a little close while stirring the pot and maybe even sneak in some compliments along the way. On the day of the dinner, I went all out. I bought fresh ingredients from the farmer's market, marinated the chicken, and made sure I had all the right spices in stock. I spent the afternoon prepping, making sure everything was just right. I even wore a nice shirt because, hey, I wanted to look good for her, too. By the time I was ready to head over to her place, I was feeling confident. I had the dish planned, my apron on, and I thought I was ready to go. When I arrived, Emma greeted me with a warm smile and invited me into her cozy apartment. She seemed genuinely excited about the dinner, which made me feel even more confident. She offered me a glass of wine, and we spent a few minutes chatting as I got the risotto started. She seemed impressed by my skills and asked a lot of questions about the cooking process, which gave me even more confidence. I was killing it. The atmosphere was relaxed, and I felt like I was really making a good impression. Things started to take a turn when I added the stock to the risotto. I had made risotto plenty of times before, but this time, for some reason, the rice wasn't absorbing the liquid as it usually would. I chalked it up to me using a slightly different kind of stock than usual and figured it would work itself out. But the longer I stirred, the more I realized something wasn't right. The rice was still too firm, and no matter how much stock I added, it wasn't softening up. I started to panic, but I didn't want to look like a total amateur in front of her, so I kept smiling and kept stirring, hoping it would somehow miraculously come together. Meanwhile, Emma was sitting at the counter, sipping her wine and chatting away. I could tell she was trying to keep the conversation light, but there was a slight hint of concern in her voice every time she glanced over at the pot. I could feel my anxiety creeping up. The risotto wasn't cooking, the chicken was still in the oven, and my flawless dinner plan was slowly falling apart. To make matters worse, I realized the garlic bread in the oven had started to burn. I pulled it out, but it was already crispy to the point of being inedible. I tried to salvage it by cutting off the burnt parts, but it was a lost cause. So now I had dry, slightly burnt garlic bread, and the risotto was stuck in some weird uncooked limbo. Emma noticed the bread and commented that it was a little crispy, which only made me feel worse. I tried to laugh it off, but the reality was sinking in. I was failing hard, and the worst part was, I couldn't figure out why it was all going wrong. I kept trying to salvage the risotto by adding more stock, but it just wouldn't come together. At this point, Emma was looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. She asked if I needed help, but I refused. I was determined to pull this off, even if it meant risking my pride. I could feel sweat starting to form on my forehead as I stirred desperately. And then, it happened. As I tried to salvage the risotto one last time, I miscalculated the amount of stock I was adding and ended up flooding the pan. The rice was completely submerged, and the liquid began to bubble over the sides. In my frantic attempts to save it, I knocked over the bottle of wine I had been using for the risotto, spilling it all over the counter. Wine splashed onto the floor, the stovetop, and the risotto itself. At this point, I was absolutely mortified. I stood there, staring at the mess I had made, knowing I had completely ruined the dinner. Emma, who had been silently watching this entire disaster unfold, burst out laughing. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but more of a surprised, almost impressed one. She couldn't believe how badly I had messed it up. "Okay, I think we need to take a break from cooking," she said between giggles. "Maybe we can order something instead?" I was beyond embarrassed, but I had no choice. We ended up ordering takeout from a local Thai restaurant and spent the rest of the evening chatting and laughing about my cooking disaster. In the end, it wasn't the romantic night I had envisioned, but it was definitely memorable. And despite the catastrophe in the kitchen, Emma seemed to enjoy the night. The next day, she texted me saying, "Hey, I still think you're a great cook even if last night was a little chaotic. Maybe next time I'll help?" I was relieved she wasn't turned off by the whole situation. We ended up joking about the dinner disaster for weeks, and honestly, I think it brought us closer. We've since made plans to cook together, this time, no risotto. So, to anyone else who's thinking about cooking a fancy meal to impress someone, just remember, sometimes things don't go as planned, and that's okay. The most important thing is to laugh it off and not take yourself too seriously. In the end, Emma and I are still friends, and maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for something more in the future. But for now, I'm sticking to simpler dishes that are harder to mess up. TLDR, tried to cook a fancy dinner to impress my crush, but everything went wrong: burnt garlic bread, ruined risotto, and spilled wine everywhere. It ended in a takeout order and a lot of laughs, but at least she still thinks I'm a good cook. TIFU, by accidentally starting a chain reaction that ruined my friend's wedding. I never thought I would be the one to destroy a wedding. I mean, I always figured I'd be the one who showed up at the reception, half drunk on wine, holding a knife to the groom's throat while yelling it's still not too late, but I never imagined I'd be the reason the wedding itself crumbled before it even started. It all started with a simple misunderstanding and a disastrous series of decisions that snowballed faster than I could blink. My friend Sarah had been planning her dream wedding for months. She'd picked the perfect venue, this gorgeous lakeside resort. The flowers were fresh, the menu looked amazing, and she had the perfect dress. Everything was falling into place. Her fiancé, David, was an all-around nice guy, and the two of them together seemed like the perfect match. All in all, it seemed like the wedding was going to be a huge success. Now, to give you some context, I'm not the most detail-oriented person in the world. I can barely remember my own birthday half the time, and when I do remember, it's usually because I get a Facebook reminder. So when Sarah asked me to be one of the bridesmaids, I was over the moon excited. I didn't think I'd be too much help when it came to planning, but I figured my main job would be to show up, look presentable, and not accidentally kill anyone with my antics. Pretty standard, right? Apparently not. It all went downhill during the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. It was an intimate affair, only the closest family and friends, so the pressure was on to make everything perfect. The night was filled with delicious food, awkward speeches, and a few too many glasses of wine, but it wasn't until the end of the evening when I made my fatal mistake. Sarah had organized a rehearsal toast for everyone to give their well wishes to the happy couple. Being in an emotional mood, thanks to the wine and the general vibe of the night, I decided to give a little speech of my own. Nothing crazy, just a few heartfelt words about how lucky I was to be a part of her big day and how happy I was that she'd found someone like David. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuine, and the room seemed to appreciate it. But here's where things went wrong. Right after I finished speaking, I decided I'd kick off the celebration by offering a toast. The problem was that I didn't exactly wait for Sarah and David to take their glasses before I started drinking from mine. I had this big, fancy flute of champagne that I thought was mine, but as I took a big sip, I realized I'd accidentally grabbed Sarah's glass. In my defense, I thought it was mine. I didn't know that Sarah's glass had a special engraving on it, something like "Best Day Ever" or some cheesy sentiment like that. The glasses all looked the same to me, so I didn't think much of it. When I realized my mistake, I felt instantly mortified. Sarah's face went from bright, happy excitement to complete and utter horror. Apparently, her glass wasn't just hers, it was part of the wedding ceremony itself. The glass had been specially selected and engraved by her mother. She was going to use it for the wedding toast the next day, and it was supposed to be a sentimental keepsake for years to come. I didn't realize that at the time. I was just mortified by the fact that I'd had my lips on something so important. I apologized a million times, but Sarah was visibly upset. She immediately took the glass back from me, and I could see her trying to wipe off any remnants of my wine from the rim. But the damage had been done. Sarah's mom, who had been sitting at the table, looked like she was about to pass out. She started whispering to Sarah about how the glass was irreplaceable and how this could potentially ruin the whole wedding. I thought she was exaggerating, but the more I saw Sarah's face, the more I realized that I had just accidentally destroyed her wedding. The rest of the evening was a blur of awkward silence, people trying to cheer Sarah up, and me trying to pretend like I wasn't the world's biggest idiot. I don't know how much time passed, but eventually, the night wound down, and I went back to my hotel room to try and sleep off the impending dread. The next morning was the big day. Everything was fine, at least on the surface. The hair and makeup were perfect, the flowers were still gorgeous, and no one seemed to be talking about the glass incident. I thought I might be off the hook. Then, during the wedding itself, Sarah made an announcement to the entire guest list. The toast would have to be postponed because, as she said, there was a minor technical issue. It wasn't until later, when I cornered her outside the ceremony space to apologize again, that she finally explained what had happened. Apparently, the wedding planner had informed her that the glass had a unique flaw that made it irreplaceable. Without that glass, they wouldn't be able to perform a traditional toast. They had tried to find another glass to use as a backup, but it didn't fit the theme of the ceremony, and it wasn't the one Sarah had envisioned for years. They had to go with a plan B where they used a completely different set of glasses. While they made it work, the whole event felt off. The glass was supposed to symbolize their bond, and now, it was just gone. The photographer had even captured me drinking from it, and as soon as Sarah saw the pictures, she started tearing up. It was a minor blunder to most people, but to Sarah, it was like I had trampled on her entire wedding day. Afterward, she thanked me for being there but also made it very clear that my enthusiasm had ruined her most important moment. David, who was normally the calm one, actually mentioned that the glass issue might be a sign that their marriage wasn't meant to be. I swear he was joking, but that didn't make me feel any better. The rest of the wedding went off without major incident, but the damage had been done. The toast was awkward, the glass was irreplaceable, and I was the one who had made it all fall apart. In the end, Sarah and David are still together, and Sarah eventually forgave me, after some serious damage control on my part. But I will never forget the look on her face when she saw me drinking from that glass. I'll never live this down. So, yeah. That's how I accidentally ruined my best friend's wedding with one simple mistake, drinking from the wrong glass. If you ever get invited to be a bridesmaid, I highly recommend sticking to just the bouquet toss and avoiding the champagne flutes at all costs. TIFU by accidentally inviting my ex to my wedding. So, this all started a few months ago when my fiancé and I were planning our wedding. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and I'm getting married to the most wonderful woman I've ever met, Olivia. We've been together for 3 years now, and everything has been amazing until my big mistake happened. Let me start with a bit of background. Olivia and I met at a mutual friend's party and hit it off instantly. We were both in a good place emotionally, and our relationship moved quickly but smoothly. We're both kind of introverts, so we enjoy the quieter side of life, and that's made us even closer. I've had one major relationship before Olivia, my ex, Hannah. Hannah and I were together for about 5 years, and we went through a lot together. We got each other through tough times, but we also faced a lot of struggles. Eventually, we drifted apart. There wasn't any huge drama or cheating involved. It was just one of those situations where we realized that we wanted different things in life. She wanted a family right away, and I wanted to focus on my career and my personal goals. We broke up, and it was sad, but we both agreed it was for the best. We stayed friends for a while, but eventually, we both moved on and drifted further apart. Fast forward to about a year after Hannah and I broke up. That's when I met Olivia. It was just casual at first, but the more time we spent together, the more I realized that Olivia was the one. She was my soulmate. I could picture a future with her, something I never thought I'd be able to do with anyone else after Hannah. So, with that context, we come to the actual event that led to this disaster. About 2 months ago, I was going through my contact list on my phone. I was trying to figure out who I should invite to the wedding. You know how it is, sometimes you forget people or accidentally leave someone out. So, I opened up my contacts and saw that I had an old number for Hannah. We hadn't really spoken in over a year, but I didn't think much of it. We were still technically friends, right? We had mutual friends, and I figured it would be nice to extend an invite to her, just to be polite. After all, we had a pretty decent breakup, and I thought I was being mature about it. I didn't give it much thought. I just tapped her name, wrote a message along the lines of, "Hey, I'm getting married in a couple of months, and I wanted to invite you. Hope you're doing well." I hit send without a second thought. What I didn't realize, however, was that I had mistakenly sent that message to my ex's new phone number, which I had saved a while ago under the name Hannah, new. I hadn't even noticed that I had saved her contact twice, once under her old number and again under her new one. I was so focused on sending out invites, I didn't think to double-check the contact. The mistake didn't hit me until a couple of days later when I received a response. The message said, "Hi. I think you might have the wrong number, but thank you for the invite. I'm glad you're doing well. Congrats on the wedding. I'm happy for you. Hannah. I stared at my phone for a solid minute, my heart sinking. At first, I thought maybe it was some random person who had my ex's number, but then I realized what had happened. It was my ex's new phone number. I had sent the invite to Hannah's new number, not the one I used to have. The next wave of panic hit me as I processed that I had accidentally invited her to my wedding. Why was this such a big deal, you ask? Well, my fiancée Olivia didn't know about this Hannah, new contact. She didn't know that I'd been texting my ex's new number, and honestly, I didn't think it was a big deal either. In hindsight, I should have deleted the number a long time ago, but it was just one of those things that didn't cross my mind. Now, the next part of the story gets complicated. I had to make a decision fast. Do I leave things as they are and hope Olivia never finds out? Or do I tell her what happened? I chose the latter, of course, because I didn't want to get caught in a lie. So, I sat Olivia down and explained the whole situation. I told her that I had accidentally sent the wedding invite to Hannah's new phone number, but it was truly just an honest mistake. I reassured her that there was no hidden agenda, no secret communication, and I wasn't trying to rekindle anything with my ex. Olivia was visibly upset at first. She asked me why I had even kept Hannah's number in the first place. I honestly didn't have a good answer. It was just one of those things. But as I explained further, Olivia started to calm down a little. She understood that it was an honest mistake, but she was still hurt by the fact that I hadn't deleted my ex's number sooner. After that conversation, I thought everything was okay. I even texted Hannah's new number, apologizing for the mix-up, and let her know that there was no need to come to the wedding. She was understanding and didn't seem upset, which made me think everything was resolved. But that's not where the story ends. A couple of days later, my worst fear came true. Olivia told me that she had been talking to one of her friends about the wedding, and it turned out that Olivia's friend had also been invited by Hannah. Yes, my ex somehow managed to get an invitation to my wedding through some backdoor channels, and Olivia's friend had been planning to attend. It turns out that my ex had made a couple of social media posts about my wedding invite, and she had shared the news with mutual friends of ours. I wasn't just inviting Hannah to my wedding, I had essentially opened the door for a whole bunch of people from my past that I wasn't intending to invite. At this point, I was in full panic mode. I couldn't backtrack on this. There was no way to uninvite people who had already made plans, but I knew it was going to cause a serious issue with Olivia. The situation spiraled. Olivia was devastated that I had allowed my ex to become involved in the wedding in any capacity. I honestly didn't know what to do. After a lot of emotional back and forth, we came up with a compromise. Hannah wouldn't be invited to the actual ceremony, but she could attend the reception only if she agreed to stay at a distance and not make a scene. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best solution we could come up with under the circumstances. So, that's the story of how I accidentally invited my ex to my wedding. In the end, I've learned a valuable lesson about not keeping old contacts in my phone and being more mindful of the people I'm inviting to such an important event. But honestly, I'm just thankful Olivia and I were able to work through it, even though it wasn't easy. I'll make sure the only people I invite to my wedding in the future are the people I actually want to be there. If I ever have another wedding, it's going to be a lot less complicated. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.